Welcome back to the Sampan Viking on China channel. The title of this video is Another Soft Underbelly Proves to be a Tough Old Gut. And this is about the withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan, not simply as a reversal in a particular country, but as marking the entire failure of a massive geopolitical strategy that has literally been decades in the making. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I firmly believe this strategy was and how it was supposed to work, and in contrast, why and how it all went so disastrously wrong. Well, I suppose to say that a major geopolitical strategy has been in play and failed is a fairly dramatic and quite a big claim to make. I feel justified in making it. I think it has been discussed in part. All the bits are pretty much visible. It's all been shown, it's all been tried in various bits and pieces. And all we have to do really is join up the dots. And if it makes sense, if it's logical, if it fits the facts that we know, I think it is something that we can be very, very confident about. In short, what we had was an attempt by the United States at the height of its unipolar moment at the end of the Cold War and the defeat of the Soviet Union to extend its power, with the plan of it being indefinite, to totally overwhelm and destroy many of its smaller, lesser geopolitical opponents, and at the same time to surround, fracture, fragment, and otherwise keep down its main geopolitical rivals, or potential rivals as they were at that stage. This plan started, at least in the form that we recognize it, in the 1990s. And we had Kagan, we have Wolfitz's, the New American Project, Wolfitz's blueprint for the New American Century, etc., etc., etc. All had all the key elements of what I think we've seen play out for the last 30 years. I know there are a number of events that are pivotal moments in the implication of this strategy, and it is tempting to be sidelined into how they happened and why they happened. I'm going to avoid doing that because it takes us a little bit too far into conspiracy theory territory. So whether by accident or design, whether by planning or simple opportunism, a series of events happened, several key events happened that enabled parts of this plan to come forward. The very basic part, the very first part of this was, of course, the first Gulf War against Iran in 1990 and 91. And this left an Iraq which was completely smashed and militarily overcome. It was a hollow shell of the country that it once had been before the war. And of course, with the imposition of sanctions against it, very clearly nothing was going to improve there anytime soon. This happened in 1990. I think planners in America, neocon planners in America, saw this and started to think about the implications of this and putting their plans together. They had other business to take care of at that time. They were rolling back the former Soviet states in Eastern Europe up to the Russian border, and of course they had to dismantle that big potential mini rival, the thorn in their side, which was Yugoslavia, and that pretty much took up most of the 90s. The next big event, of course, was the attack by the Al-Qaeda against United States in September 11th, 2001. This opened the door to the United States to impose its power into Afghanistan, a difficult country. It was able to bully its way through Pakistan and the top route via Turkmenistan, and to establish itself as a power there. Whether or not there was ever a definite order of how this was going to play out or not is difficult to say, but I think I can just say briefly what the plan was supposed to be, and I'll just add to this what I've said previously in other videos. These plans take many years to put together. They are complicated, they have many working parts, many disparate groups in many different locations, and for these plans to work, and for the narrative to support it to be convincing, everything has to happen like clockwork in order to maintain the momentum and the PR. And when a moment things go wrong, it goes wrong pretty disastrously, because these things really are like super tankers. You can't easily change their direction. And in fact, I think a super tanker is actually a doddle compared to this. You cannot get different messages to all these groups and all these different people to make sure they do the right thing at the right time, don't go off half cock, or simply when there is doubt, not sure what they're supposed to do anymore, and so watch the predictable chaos ensue. What was supposed to happen, I think, is very, very simple. It was about getting away all the way from the Middle East right into the heart of Central Asia, and once in Central Asia, to start a process of major unrest within Russia and within parts of China, to the point of continuing what the end of the Cold War had done in Europe, the rolling back of former Soviet influence in European states, to repeat that in Central Asian states, and then to start dismantling large parts of Russia itself, going in through into the heart of up the Caucasus and into Central Asia, and to dismantle Siberia effectively, to reduce Russia to a European Ural area rump on the eastern end of Europe, with the US in control of a new massive Central Asian republic empire, sorry, to include large parts of China, to dislocate Xinjiang, to dislocate Tibet, to join up with Mongolia, which in those days was between the two countries, to separate away Inner Mongolia, obviously to claim back Hong Kong. I remember all these plans were being laid in the 90s, whilst Hong Kong was still British and China was still a much, much poorer country. All of the moves that we saw, the big attempt to take over, to kick the Russians out of the Crimea, was essential to the plan, because that would have removed at a stroke any serious Russian naval presence from the Black Sea going into the Aegean and the eastern Mediterranean, which in the event did prove crucial, which I will talk about a bit later. Georgia was mattered, because had Georgia been successful in its campaign against South Ossetia and Abkhazia, that would have led the war to reignite the terror problems, which had been ongoing from the 90s into the first decade of the 21st century, into southern Europe, in the Caucasus regions, in the Islamic areas, and spread those areas there. Uh, Iran was a major target. We know that Iraq was taken again to be the other side of Afghanistan. Everybody was saying Iran was the next target. It was pretty obvious it wasn't. Syria was important for that to go, because Syria would have given a direct land and air corridor from the eastern Mediterranean that didn't rely on Turkey. These would all have been client states: Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, spreading into the stands of Central Asia, maybe even destabilizing Pakistan to the point where US could put its influence into there as well. It would have been a massive, massive success that would have left the United States dominant in the heart of in the Middle East and the heart of Asia, and everybody else subordinate for at least the next 100 years. And it would have been done in numerous ways. When there were weak countries, it would have been direct military intervention. When it was stronger countries, they'd have used a hybrid warfare, starting with unrest, terrorism. Where there is terrorism, you need to have aid. Where there are aid workers and NGOs. Where there are aid workers and NGOs, you need contractors to go in to protect them. And once the de facto independence has been achieved in these areas, then the main US Army can deploy in bases there by invitation of their installed puppet government, as we saw in Iraq, as we saw in Afghanistan. And this was going to be repeated, no doubt, in Iran, and then going into other countries and areas which are now parts of China and parts of Russia. A very audacious plan, and it all relied on things working like clockwork, the plan coming on at stage after stage after stage, in sync with a big plan that had been laid down. Well, it didn't work, and it failed disastrously. It went wrong, I think, quite early in the plan, which is not really that surprising, considering just the scope of the plan. And the more they tried to adjust for it, the more they tried to rejig the plan as best they could, really just seemed to make it worse and worse and worse. Where did it start to go wrong? Because it went well enough at first. They got into Afghanistan, check. They got into Iraq, check. They started the Arab Spring, check. And that itself started to spill out into areas like Syria. But they never got a chance to attack Iran. And the other things that they had to do in order to keep things in check. So the main reason for this, actually, I think, is one man who is going to go down in the history of the 21st century of one of its greatest statesmen. And I refer, of course, to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Plans that were hatched in the days of Boris Yeltsin, a compliant US puppet, suddenly came up against a man who was subtle, intelligent, a former intelligence officer, not in hock to the United States, and indeed um, somebody who fully understood the nature of the play that was being worked against him. With Russia being primarily the first target of a lot of these, of a lot of this plan. Well, he managed cleverly to block the United States at every turn. And so I think we can quite happily say he is the man who stopped the United States in its tracks. We first got wind of this in Georgia, where, contrary to expectation, the Russian army came into Georgia. They fought off the Georgian army attacking South Ossetia South and Abkhazia, and ended up running through the country and dismantling its military. And there's been no more attempts to do anything of this sort from that location since. This was then followed by Syria, where he was actively involved in helping the Assad government in fighting off the imported jihadi forces that were trying to unseat him. And when the United States then moved to counter his influence in the Ukraine, he made sure that the Crimea and the naval base at Sevastopol was kept firmly in Russian hands, therefore enabling him to keep the support coming through the Black Sea, through the Aegean, into the Eastern Mediterranean, to block US attempts. And there are stories, I give them credence, that Obama backed off because the Russian fleet deployed across the Eastern Med and said, "We will shoot down your cruise missiles if you start an intervention against our ally Syria." And that was where it all started to come off the rails. Iran then started working, I'm pretty sure, a lot of liaison with Russia and China by this point. If Putin did the heavy lifting at the end, he was joined not later by a man of similar caliber in China in the form of President Xi Jinping, and together they have started moulding a very effective resistance to this project. And of course, the first point of concentration of that resistance was going to be Iran, to make sure that nobody was able to get a pretext sufficient to launch an attack on Iran, and to make sure that the other preconditions necessary, no doubt, to launch an attack on Iran were not met. And that was how it all started to unravel. So things did not go to plan. Um, the Crimea did not become a US base denied to the Russians. Georgia did not establish control over the breakaway republics in its north and allow the spread of instability back into the Russian Caucasus. There was no link up directly from the Eastern Med to Syria to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and the surrounding stands. That meant the ability to move large numbers of ground troops and land-based aircraft across a virtually invisible barrier where the opposition would have little idea what's going on, and without a potentially recalcitrant Turkey trying to expend its own pound of flesh for allowing it to happen, in other words, in completely client territory, was gone. That never occurred. That means that the attempts at starting an insurrection in Xinjiang were short-lived, and were quickly dealt with very effectively by the Chinese state, by investment, by infrastructure, by all manner of projects which actually took the sting out of the tail of extremism. But the narrative never changed. So at a time when Xinjiang was very obviously at peace with itself and enjoying significant economic growth, we were being told here in the West it's a hellhole where genocide is being committed. That undoubtedly was the narrative that they hoped, written in the 1990s, is what they would have had by the time we got to today. By this time, however, reality and uh, and spin had diverged to such an extent it was simply ridiculous, and anybody who really took the trouble to look could see it. At that point, then, it became difficult for the Americans, I think, to see where they went from here. Added on to that, their worst fear had come to pass. The two countries who were the target of their geopolitical strategy, fully aware that they were the targets of a major geopolitical strategy, had combined forces and were very effectively pushing back. And of course, the China of today, the financial and military superpower today, is many times greater than the China of the 1990s, or indeed at the beginning of this current century, this current millennium. Likewise, after 20 years of Putin in control, Russia has transformed itself from a basket case back into a powerful nation once more, even under the weight of massive and crippling US sanctions. Similar thing, I think you could say for Iran. With the support of the two big powers, it was never going to fall, and as such, the entire plan that had been laid by Wolfitzer, by Kagan, and the other neocons back in the 90s came into contact with a reality that was ever increasingly divergent from what they had hoped and planned to create. And in the end, there was nowhere else to go. Afghanistan was becoming a trap. The lines of communication out of Afghanistan across third-party countries were closing down, and the prospect of having a large military force landlocked within hostile territory was even a bigger humiliation than one of repeating the Saigon pullout, which we've seen recently. Because, yes, recreating Stalingrad would be a hell of a lot worse than recreating Saigon. So the Americans got out. And with that withdrawal, any dreams of extending its presence throughout that region and achieving the kind of geopolitical aims that they originally set out to do. The world has moved on. The targets are too powerful now for America to be able to do that too, and we will now see, I think, a major withdrawal from the Middle East in total. I think forces in Syria and Iraq will be gone within a year, and that is game over. And there is collateral damage to the United States in this. They spent a lot of money, and whilst in the terms of an overall war, the thousands dead don't really register. It sounds callous to say, but in the terms of a full-scale shooting war, the kind of casualties they've had from that 20 years doesn't really match up to the casualties of, say, even a short, high-intensity engagement. But they have expended a lot of credibility in this project, and by failing, by being seen to have failed, because the intelligence agencies of the world, the governments of the world, can see this just as clearly as me, and far better, because they will actually see the details, of which I can only dream. And the credibility of the United States as a power, let alone as a friend and trustworthy ally, has gone up in smoke. And they don't really have time to recover it, because the rest of the world isn't sitting still and watching. China continues to grow, Russia continues to recover, Eurasia continues to congeal into a new and powerful bloc, and America can do is now transfer its power to the Asia Pacific and hope that at least it can stall China long enough in that region to stop what it sees as an existential crisis emerging, in which China has complete dominance in the Pacific region, right up to the west coast of the USA, which does make the world a more dangerous place. As I've said before, it does make Taiwan a potential flashpoint, and it does mean that we will have to watch what happens over there very, very carefully indeed. Well, this is a much longer video than I thought it would be. Thank you if you've stuck with it and watched all the way through. I hope I've been as concise in my words as I thought I was going to be in my mind. Apologies if I haven't. If you think I've missed anything out, leave a comment and I'll be only too happy to fill in the blanks. If you did enjoy this video, please like. If you want to watch further videos, please subscribe. If you want to be notified when further videos come out, hit the bell. And if you would like other people to watch this, please share. And again, leave a comment. People are saying that funny things are happening with likes, with subscriptions, comments, and all the like. So please do all of these things. Let's show the algorithm that we're not bots, we're not messing around, we are real people, and we all want to know what this channel has to say. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you'll join me in the next video in the not too distant future.